In January, the Supreme Court struck down long-standing restrictions on corporations' political campaign spending. The Citizens United decision now allows corporate and union donors to pay for ads that will run within 30 days of a presidential primary or 60 days of a general election. Previously, the McCain-Feingold campaign finance reform law barred such spending. How will this controversial law affect upcoming political campaigns? I'm Ted Williams, and this is The Professors.
From across the city and the 7 city colleges of Chicago, broadcasting from 63rd and Halsted at Kennedy King College. Professors take the art of conversation to a higher degree.
By a 5-4 vote, the court overturned a 20-year ruling that said companies could be prohibited from using money from their general treasuries to produce and run their own campaign ads. Chief Justice John Roberts and Justices Samuel Alito, Anton Scalia, and Clarence Thomas joined Kennedy to form the majority. Strongly disagreeing, Justice John Paul Stevens said in his dissent, the court's ruling threatens to undermine the integrity of elected institutions around the nation. Is the Supreme Court overreaching? To debate this issue, we have invited Rafael Rivadeneira, President, Republican National Hispanic Assembly of Illinois, Joe Moore, Alderman of Chicago's 49th Ward, and journalist and reporter Ray Hanania. It appears that many members of both parties are saying this isn't a good idea. Could this be a first step towards bipartisanship? Rafael, what is your take on the Supreme Court decision?
I think this is a great step and it should be applauded. It restored freedom of speech, especially political speech, and I think the Constitution ensures that political speech should be free, despite some people maybe not agreeing with what that speech is.
Okay.
Regardless of how people decide to associate themselves, they should be free to advocate for their issues.
Okay. Well, here's, as we were just mentioning in the opening, there was a poll that was done by the Washington Post and ABC that said that 80% of Americans disagree with the ruling. And that disagreement was across partisan lines. So you had 70% Democrat and Republican, 80% independents. And so it seems like there is this overwhelming public rejection of this notion of that corporations should be able to spend whatever they want to on campaigns. Alderman Moore, what do you think about this?
Well, I think as Rafael's comment indicated, maybe there isn't bipartisanship yet, because I strongly disagree with his opinion on this very dangerous case.
Why do you think it's so dangerous?
Well, first of all, the Founding Fathers, when they gave free speech rights, they meant to be given to individuals. A corporation is basically a legal fiction. It's a legal entity created by Congress many, many years ago. And to give corporations the legal status of individuals, of human beings, I think is very, very dangerous for our political system.
Okay.
The fact of the matter is that just by giving the huge amount of money that corporations can funnel into the political discourse, it distorts the process, it inhibits and intimidates elected officials even more than they already are by powerful corporations.
Okay.
And it'll have a very, very, I believe, very serious impact on public policy in our country.
Ray, what is your take on the ruling?
Well, definitely is going to change how elections are run. I mean, you're going to see ads in the last 30 days and 60 days before an election that are really going to have serious impact, because who has the most money? Corporations. They're going to be the ones that are going to be able to find the money to pay for some huge advertising in presidential elections. I tend to agree with Joe. I don't like the idea of corporations being treated like they're human beings and people, even though they're made up by people. I think Rafael is right, though, that when two sides come together, maybe there is some good in that, but I'm just disturbed that the same ability of the average person like you or me as individuals, we would never be able to reach that type of influence in an election.
But let me say this, and I think I'm going to kick it back to you in a second, Rafael, but are we talking about corporations or are we talking about citizen groups? And the case that was brought before the Supreme Court was about this documentary about Hillary Clinton, and it wasn't the corporation that we would think of as a corporation. I mean, it probably legally was incorporated, so it would be a corporation, but Citizens United is a group of citizens that are attempting to put forth policy proposals and suggestions and that sort of thing. And so while many of us feel these reactions that, very strongly against corporate interest, are we limiting, by limiting their ability to run ads, are we limiting the ability of organizations that want to influence the political process. I know, Rafael, you agree with the decision. Why don't you speak to that a little bit, because I think that's a very important issue.
I will, and at the same time, I also want to address this Washington Post poll that you brought up. That poll very erroneously asked the question whether corporations should be limited as to how much money they contribute to candidates, and that is not what this decision did. So again, we got the liberal media, the Washington Post, which is a corporation that is not limited by what happened in the past. They are freely able to express their advocacy, if you will, on the editorial page constantly. Up until this last ruling,
as does the Wall Street Journal and the Fox News and the Chicago Tribune, that all have very conservative editorial positions. So.
Sure. So the point being is that media is a corporation, and up until this ruling, they were exempted from the ruling that we just heard today. So all corporations shouldn't be viewed as just this evil corporation. This affected union members also being able to advocate for their positions. It affects not-for-profits like the ACLU, Sierra Club, even the NAACP.
But you know,
so we shouldn't just be looking at the...
Yeah, but let's get in the real world here.
Sure.
ACLU, the Sierra Club, the labor unions simply do not have the financial wherewithal to compete with large corporations. No one is suggesting that corporations are inherently evil. What we're suggesting, however, is that by giving corporations this huge, not even megaphone, this huge, powerful way of getting their message out, it'll distort the political process. It'll shut out and crowd out the debate from of other organizations and individuals. And quite frankly, it can intimidate elected officials who are afraid that if they go up against the corporate interests in a particular piece of legislation, that 30 days out before the election, the airwaves will be flooded with negative ads directed to them.
Okay, but let me say this for the sake of argument, because I'll just go ahead and lay out my my ideological colors on this position. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I think on the surface, when I first read it, it really ticked me off, to be honest with you, like most, I think, people who read it. And the more I started to read about it, the more I started to question and start thinking through these things. And I'm not 100% sure how I feel. I think I lean towards being upset by the decision, but I'm not 100% persuaded. But what I would say is, if the average person is looking at politics and they say, well, President Obama raised $700 million, okay, to win this election. That both parties spent $2 billion in this last campaign, 2008. Money is significant in politics. And McCain-Feingold, which is what this ruling basically overturned, really did not slow that down very often or very much. And so we're looking at, as you're speaking, you're saying, well, God forbid, look what's going to happen. Money's going to start getting into politics and determine how people vote. And it's like, I'm thinking, duh,
I think, though, the point, though, isn't just that money's going to get in there. When you donate money to an alderman or a congressman or a president, it's really documented. We follow every penny. We know exactly where it starts and where it ends, for the most part. And if we don't, you could end up getting in trouble. I'm not convinced that when you allow a corporation to dump $1 million or $10 million into an election 30 days before an election, that I'm really going to know where that money came from. And I'm not going to know who really is behind it coming through. I mean, if a president says something about an issue that may impact an industry, where is that money coming from? That's the issue to me. I just want to know who's really advocating behind these dollars, and that's not to gang up on you. Also, I don't think it's a Republican, Democratic thing. I do think I just have some concerns about sunshine and openness in terms of, where is this coming from? Who's trying to influence it? And when you get into the corporate world, things are not as open as they are in the political world.